One of our problems is to keep getting them ready to leave because
they have a good deal.
For many kids, we become substitute family, and the kids will tell us sometimes that they didn't know what it was to have a family that really cared about them.
Hello, I'm Peggy Bald. Welcome to Worth Quoting, a program sponsored by Florida Community College at Jacksonville. Today we're going to talk with Sister Mary Rose McGeady, the president of Covenant House International. I'd like to welcome you here today, Sister.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us about Covenant House.
Well, Covenant House is essentially a shelter for runaway and homeless teenagers. We are in 9 American cities and 4 other countries, and essentially we look for kids who have run away and are on the street and who really need shelter. Protect them from all the dangers that are out there for kids.
When you say you look for them, what do you mean you look for them?
Well, every Covenant House, and we have 13 Covenant Houses, every Covenant House has an outreach effort. And in the big cities we go out in vans, usually from about 10 o'clock at night to 3 o'clock in the morning. And we look for teenagers who are hanging out and living on the street. And we find hundreds and hundreds of them. And we invite them into Covenant House. We tell them that Covenant House is a place for second chances, an opportunity to turn their life around and get off the street and get home, or to find another place for them to live.
How would you identify a runaway kid if you were driving around a city? Between 10 and 3, there's probably...
Well, there's a lot of them, a lot of kids out there. And a lot of places, kids who live on the street get to know our vans. They wait for our vans at night.
Are your vans marked?
Oh, yeah, they're marked for Covenant House. And many times kids will wait and come in the van and talk to the workers or the volunteers. We provide sandwiches and cold or hot drinks for them. And an opportunity to really talk about what's happening in their lives, why they're on the street. And it's very easy for kids to begin to talk about the fact that they've left home, and they talk about what went on at home, the abuse or the conflict and so forth.
Why are they on the street? Why do we have kids hanging out homeless on the street? When we say kids, what ages are we talking about?
Well, most of the kids we serve are between 15 and 21. We don't admit kids over 21. And the vast majority of them are between 16 and 18. Our average age is about 17. And we just find hundreds of kids who have taken off from home because of conflict in the family. Oftentimes kids who are the products of divorced and broken homes, and just unhappy kids, oftentimes in conflict with their parents, or whose families have kind of fallen apart. We see kids who have been in foster care all their lives, who never really had a family or don't remember their family. And we also see kids whose families have very recently broken up. And we see kids who take off because of abuse. The biggest reason why kids are on the street is because of family conflict.
Like what kind of family conflict? I mean, well, if my husband and I have a spat tonight, are my kids going to run away?
Probably not.
I hope not.
But you're never quite sure. But kids whose families are in chronic conflict, with unhappy homes, very often characterized by alcoholism or drug abuse, or of abuse of one another in the family. We see a lot of kids who've been victims of incest, oftentimes by my step-parents or mama's boyfriend, or just friends that drop into the house, kids who really are victimized. We also see kids that come out of poverty, kids who don't see any future. And I asked one boy a few weeks ago if he had run away, and he said to me, "Well, sister, I'll tell you, I just quietly walked away. It was so awful. I figured there must be something better for me someplace else." This was a bright boy from a very poor home, a welfare family, and he was really looking for something better in life. He's doing well with us. He's in job training now. He has a job. He's saving his money. He's going to school at night. And this kid is going to make it and do very well.
So he didn't run away from home so much as he ran to something he thought was better.
Exactly.
Well,
right.
well what happens when he comes to Covenant House?
Well, when kids come into Covenant House, we provide food, clothing, shelter, and counseling for them right off the bat. That's essential. That's the core of our program. And we make a covenant with each kid. We say to them, we'll do certain things for you if you do certain things for yourself. And from the very beginning, we try to instill in them the concept that their life is their responsibility, that they can't just keep talking about the bad times of the past or this person that didn't treat them well, that they have to begin to own their lives and they have to begin to take responsibility.
So you give these kids some sense of control
over their own lives.
Of their own lives.
And in the covenant, we always build in the fact that we expect them to continue their education. Most of our kids have not finished high school. And that we expect them to get a job. And if they work during the day, they go to school at night and vice versa. But education and working are like a key element of all the covenants we make with kids. With some kids, you can immediately begin to plan for their return home, or you can look for a member of the family, sometimes a grandmother or an aunt or somebody, who will let them stay with them until they finish high school if their family has collapsed. So always planning for the future, school, working and saving your money, these are all intricate parts of what we do for every kid. Some of our kids are very mixed up all their lives. They've had difficulties. So we try to provide a counseling base that helps them to work through some of their problems and to begin to see some light on the horizon. We work to instill hope in kids. And we call ourselves the place for second chances, to give a lot of these kids that the first time around just had a really tough life a chance to do it better the second time.
How many kids are we talking about?
Oh, wow. In all of our Covenant houses, every night, we average about 1,500 kids.
1,500 kids a night on the streets.
Right. And last year, we served 34,000 different kids. Now, some of those kids come and they stay one night. And maybe we're able to help them make the call home that repairs the situation and they can go back home. If that's not a place where they've been abused, we always work hard to get kids back home. If there is no home to go to, or if there's a home that they shouldn't go back to, immediately we start this planning for what is the next best alternative.
I know from some of the readings I've done about Covenant House that you're seeing an increase, as we are everywhere these days, with unwed mothers. What do you do for the pregnant teenager? Well,
as you know, as recently as 3 years ago, we were seeing about 65% boys and 35% girls, occasionally a pregnant girl or a young mother with a baby. And what we've seen in the last 3 years is a constant rise in those statistics. And we expect this summer that in most of our Covenant houses, we'll be approaching 50% of boys and girls. A lot of the pregnant girls are young, pregnant teenagers. Some of them have been rejected by their families, told to get out because
of
they're
the pregnancy?
Pregnant. Yes, very sad. So first of all, we try to provide a safe, stable place in which they can settle down and then begin to deal with the fact that they're pregnant. Fortunately, we have very good medical staffs in our Covenant houses, and we have good working relationships with maternal clinics and so forth, so that we can usually work out a good plan for the girl's pregnancy. If a girl comes into us who is already a mother, and I'll tell you, it would just amaze you how many homeless teenagers there are with babies. A lot of these girls went to live with their boyfriend. They thought that this was going to be the perfect solution. And then they think getting pregnant is going to make it even better, and the opposite happens. The boy gets frightened, and in the face of being a father and having a wife and family, he takes off. And the girl is kind of high and dry, without any money, without a place to be. These girls come in with their babies. They stay with us an average of about 5 months. If the girl is very young, let's say a 15-year-old with a baby, a year old, we actually try to find foster homes that will take mother and child. If they're older and they're old enough to think about becoming a single working parent, then we work very hard with them to help them to believe that they don't have to be a welfare mother, that we do job training with them and we help them to get jobs. We have our daycare centers and we try to teach the girls that they can get up in the morning and wash and feed their baby and take the baby to the daycare center, go to work for the day, come home, and to imitate as close as possible what life will be like for them as a working mother. And we do very well with these girls because they're so motivated to keep that baby. It's rare that one of them wants to give the baby up for adoption. So we work hard to help them to know how to be a parent, but it's tough when you're still a teenager and you really haven't lived your teenage years to settle down and be a full-time parent. So we also try to help them to help one another, you know, and oftentimes when they leave us, they go 2 by 2 so that they can...
Two girls
with their babies, so that they can help each other, you know, with the care of the children and babysitting and so forth.
You have girls and boys in the same house, or do you have separate houses? Or?
Well, they're in the same building often, but most of our buildings are large enough. We have separate units for the boys and the girls. In New York, we have 8 units, and now we have 4 units of boys and 4 units of girls.
And how many kids do you have in New York?
We have an average of 400 kids a night. In the crisis center, we have the 8 units, which are 30 to 32 bed units. So we have close to 190 kids every night in our crisis center in Manhattan. The girls who come into the crisis center, we move to a separate building if they're pregnant or they have babies, because they just need a different environment. We also have a rites of passage program in New York for kids who are over 17, who want to become independent, who want to work, save their money, and live independently. The rites of passage takes its name from the fact that we believe that kids have a right to be accompanied on the passage to adulthood. It's tough to be 17, 18 years old and thinking about being independent. So they can move into the rites of passage program. They go to, as long as they go to work every day and they're taking at least a course in school and saving their money, some kids stay with us up to 2 years.
So these kids really have a full day once they come to see you and they sign this covenant, this agreement. They agree that they're going to have some education, they're going to work, and in turn you'll provide them what ideally their parents would provide them.
That's right.
Food, clothing, and shelter.
That's right. In fact, one of our problems is to keep getting them ready to leave. Because
they have a good deal.
For many kids, we become substitute family. And the kids will tell us sometimes that they didn't know what it was to have a family that really cared about them. So that when we see a kid who really is on their feet and has some money in the bank and is going to work every day and maybe going to school 2 or 3 nights a week, then we begin talking about an apartment. And what we will do is we will rent the apartment for the first year, because it's many landlords won't rent to these kids.
Yeah, sure.
And then the kid pays us the first year, and then the second year when they have a rent history, then we spin the apartment off to the kids and they become the tenant. So that each step along the way, we try to just put that hand under them that will just lift them to the next level and help them to make it. And there's just nothing so wonderful as seeing how these kids respond and how many of them do make it with the kind of help that we're able to offer to them.
Do you worry about the drugs and the AIDS and everything we read so much about with young people today?
Yes, we worry about it and we experience it. We figure that probably 85% of teenagers in our country today have at least experimented with drugs.
85%?
We figure 85% of them. When they get to the point of being honest, when they fill out a paper where they don't have to sign their name, 85% of teenagers say, oh yes, I've tried marijuana, or even some kids will say they've tried crack or one of the other drugs. It's part of the culture today. It's unusual that we get a kid who is really a serious addict, although it's possible. Some of these kids have been taking drugs since they were 12 or 13 years old. So we do offer drug rehabilitation and counseling services. And we ask kids who really appear to have a genuine drug problem to stay with us for 6 months. It takes us that long to really turn kids' heads around and to really see what drugs have done to them in the past and what they'll do to them if they stay on them in the future. It's the same with alcohol. You know, people talk all the time about kids on drugs, but the number of kids in this country who drink and who drink to excess is far worse than the kids who are on drugs.
Of course, and with alcohol and drugs, oftentimes will come the first sexual experience. And
Absolutely.
with street kids, sometimes that's their only means of income.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of the dangers. One of the reasons we go out looking for kids at night is that we're not the only ones out there looking for them. It's really a sad commentary on our country that there are people out there looking for teenagers to pull them into prostitution or into drug selling. And we've had girls as young as 13 run into Covenant House, run away from pimps and johns and from the prostitution trade, and really saying to us, you know, I got picked up on the street when I ran away, and first thing I knew I was in prostitution. And kids hate it, and they stay in it because of the money and the fears of leaving. But we get kids who've been in prostitution, and the sad part is that the prostitution trade is looking for young kids because the customers believe that the younger the boy or the girl is, the less likely it is that they have AIDS. Now, occasionally we find a kid who is HIV positive. The good news is that 2 years ago we were testing about 6% positive. And this year we tested 4% positive, which makes us feel hopeful that kids are really getting the education about the dangers of AIDS and they're being more careful. It's just so awful when you have to tell a teenager that they're HIV positive, and we do it very, very carefully because it's known in this country that a number of teenagers have killed themselves.
Once they get that knowledge,
once they get
it's a death sentence.
Absolutely, and it's frightening. When we find a kid who is HIV positive, we try to find the best medical service available in the area to link them into that. But it's tough for teenagers because sometimes they go to these AIDS clinics and they say people in the last stages of AIDS who are looking absolutely dreadful, and they get frightened and they don't go back. So kids who are HIV positive need an awful lot of care and protection and interest because it's a frightening disease.
And with the international scope of Covenant House, can you talk a little bit about that and how things compare between American cities and Central America?
And we're in Canada. The most interesting thing about our program in Toronto is that the kids who come to Covenant House in Toronto, the average age is only 15. Now, we're not dead sure why they're coming in so young in Canada, but we believe that the education system up there teaches kids that they don't have to put up with abuse, sexual abuse or physical abuse, and that there are programs like Covenant House. Our Latin American programs are different in the sense that it's very, very usual in Central America, in poor families, that little boys especially, but increasingly little girls, when they get to be 8, 9, 10 years old, they're told that the family can't support them anymore, that they have to now go out and make it on their own. And these become little street beggars. They work as shoeshine boys, or they work in the market, and they don't go to school. They become little street urchins. So we try, again, we do outreach in our Central American cities and find these kids and invite them into Covenant House. We find a lot of them are already little glue sniffers, so that they're on their way to drugs. For 40 cents, they can buy a little can of glue and sniff it. So that our kids tend to be younger at admission in Central America, as young as 7 sometimes. So we have group homes for them, and then we try to find the families and try to help the families by giving them food in exchange for taking the child back and promising that they'll keep the child at home. And because their motivation for sending the child out is usually poverty, in many, many families, with the help of some money and some help for the mothers, a lot of very poor mothers, a lot of them will keep the children at home and send them to school. We have about 800 kids in care in Central America.
And where in Central America are you?
We're in Mexico City. If you've ever been to Mexico City, every traffic light that you stop at, a kid's hand comes in the front window and begs. There's just hundreds of kids on the street in Mexico City. We're also in Guatemala City, and in Antigua, Guatemala, which is a beautiful city up in the mountains. And we're in Tegucigalpa, the capital city in Honduras. And the numbers of kids in Central America, and most Americans have read about the situation in South America. We're not in South America, but the problem of street children is an international problem. And it's especially great in Central and South America.
And it's mainly motivated by the poverty there?
In Central and South America, it's mostly motivated by poverty. In the first world, it's mostly the result of family breakdown. Well, I honestly believe that we have a real crisis in the United States right now in the area of family breakdown. There are just so many families breaking up and so many divorces, and oftentimes it's the teenagers who can't cope. You know, in many instances they've lost the parent that they were closest to, and they're in the midst of adolescent turmoil as it is, and then to try to deal with their parents' pain and the loss of a parent. And one boy said to me recently, Sister, I not only got a new father, I got a new house, a new town, new brothers and sisters, a new school, but no new friends, and I couldn't make it.
Too many changes all at once.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about adolescence and why the kids are so vulnerable at that time to these kinds of changes like breakups in the family?
Well, adolescence has always been the best of times and the worst of times. And I think even what you might call the lucky kids, the kids from good homes and strong backgrounds, have a hard time going through adolescence today. And there's an enormous shift in our culture going on. Things are changing. Values are not as stable as they used to be. Some kids will tell you they don't know the difference between right and wrong. And the whole sexual revolution and the freedom that exists among teenagers today. It's a tough time to be a teenager, and to be, and especially to be from a family that doesn't have any stability and values to offer you. I also think we have a kind of a moral crisis, because a lot of parents are finding it hard to be a parent. It's hard for them to know what to teach their kids in terms of what's right and what's wrong, and how to set limits, and what to do in terms of constructive punishment when kids go past them. And I'll tell you, if I was President of the United States, I would make this a big priority to help parents to be good parents. Because, you know, most parenting is really a carbon copy of the parenting the person got. And it doesn't work anymore. You know, things have changed so much that you just can't say, well, this is the way my mother raised me, and I'm going to raise my kid the same way.
But don't all parents do that?
All parents do that, you're right.
So how are you going to change that? How are you going to make that kid who grew up in the 50s or 60s be a good parent in the 90s?
Well, you know, one of the things I think about, you know, is that there are so many parents who have been through it, you know, whose kids are now in college, and and like they've survived it. And for them to be able to sit down with young parents and just talk about the realities of what parenting is like today. What do I say to my kid when he says this to me? And what do I say when my kid won't talk to me? And what are the really important values to inculcate in your kids? I would just love to, I'd love to see every church, every synagogue, every civic organization sponsor parenting groups where young and experienced parents, and especially single parents, who are doing this hard thing of raising kids by themselves, if they could sit down with experienced parents, they'd get a lot of support. They'd have somebody to talk to. You know, it used to be, you know, that the family lived closer together, and there were lots of aunts and uncles and so forth.
And grandmother was next door.
Yeah, but that's not there anymore. And once I go around and I talk to people all over this country, and so many parents come up and say to me, you know, I have 4 teenagers, and they won't talk to me. But then when you begin to find out that this is a single mother who has been working so hard, she hasn't had time for her kids. she might have loved to have the luxury of sitting down for hours and talking to them. But she just hasn't done that because her life was so hectic. But when I can talk to parents and give them advice, I say, talk to your kids. Take time to just sit down and find, when the chips are up, what's going on? What teams are you playing on? What are you interested? What's going good in school? What's tough? So that you get this pattern of talking to your youngster. And then when the chips are down, it's like you have money in the bank.
They'll come to you.
Yeah, or if you're wondering what's going on in your kid's life and you want to sit down and talk, it's not the first time. You've got this pattern established. But I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for parents today. I think it's a tough trade, and there's no training for it.
There's no training for it. Isn't that amazing? I mean, with all this education, we're the most educated society in the world, yet we don't teach people the most basic skills.
And we go to school to learn everything else, right?
It seems that way.
Right, and you know, I think teenagers themselves need to be educated about the fact that in a few years they'll be parents.
Well, what would you suggest to people calling watching today? What would you suggest to them if they want to do something about parenting in the future, about helping these kids?
Well, in some places there are you know, parenting classes, or there's good things that you can read. If people are looking for specific information about Covenant House, they can always call our crisis hotline, which is 1-800-999-9999, our 9 line.
Okay, we'll have that on the screen. We'll have your current Covenant House number on the screen for any of our viewers who may wish more information.
Good.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure.